Good evening, students. Today we are going to study the modern theory of international trade. It is given by the modern economist Heckscher and Olin. Therefore, this theory is known as, it is also known as Heckscher-Olin theory of international trade, and it is also known as modern theory. Why? Because it is given by the modern economist. Understand? Now, according to Olin, international trade is based on the principle of general theory of value. Principle of general theory of value. According to this theory, the price of a commodity depends upon demand and supply. We already studied that demand and supply play an important role in determining the price of a commodity. Understand? Now, demand of a commodity depends upon what? Price and consumer's income. Demand, according to this theory, price depends upon demand and supply of a commodity, and demand of a commodity depends upon what? Price and consumer's income. Income of the consumer depends upon factor price. What are the four factors? Land, labor, capital and entrepreneurship. The price means the remuneration received by the four factors. That is income of the consumer. Got the point? So, income of the consumer depends upon factor price, which in turn depends upon price of goods and cost of production. Got the point? Price of goods and cost of production. Because we are getting the factors of production are receiving their rewards, and that is the income of the consumer. Understand? We already studied in SY circular flow of national income. So what the consumers are, what they are doing? They are distributing or they are giving the factors service to the producers, and the producers what they are giving? They are giving remuneration. Producers are giving remuneration to the consumers in the form of what? Rent, wage, interest and profit. Consumers are giving what? Household. We can say that they are giving their service in the form of what? Land, labor, capital and entrepreneurship. And this income of the consumer again depends upon what? Factor price, and which in turn depends upon price of goods and cost of production. Got the point? Now, factor prices are determined by demand for and supply of a factor. In the same manner, the price of a commodity, the price of the factor is also depends upon what? Demand for and supply. Now, demand for a factor is derived demand, which is derived from the demand for commodities. Demand for factor is a derived demand, and which is derived from where? The demand for commodities. And supply of factors depends upon the availability of factors. Availability of factors. So, the factor prices are determined by demand for and supply of a factor, and demand for factor is derived from where? From the demand for commodities, and the supply of factors of production depends upon what? The availability of factors. Thus, we can say that this theory is based on general theory of value. That means the price of a commodity depends upon demand and supply. Got the point? Now, the next we are going to study what are the assumptions or conditions of modern theory of international trade or Heckscher and Olin theory of international trade. If these conditions are valid, then only the theory will be applicable. Now, the first assumption is two countries, two factors and two commodities model. This Hexture and Olin theory is two countries and two factors and two commodities model. Whereas David Ricardo's theory, what it was? Two countries and only two commodities. Two factors were not there in the Ricardo's theory. So the first assumption, two countries, two factors and two commodities. Second assumption, perfect competition in both commodity market and factor market. Both commodity market and factor market, there exists perfect competition. Who is assuming this? The modern economist Hexture and Olin. They are assuming that there exists perfect competition in commodity market as well as in the factor market. Now the third assumption, factors are mobile. Mobile means what? Movable within the country and immobile between the countries. And they are immobile between the countries. Fourth assumption, production functions are different for the different commodities. Production functions are different for different commodities. What is production function? It shows the functional relationship between input and output. We already studied in FY BCom, Business Economics. So the fourth assumption is production functions are different for the different commodities. Fifth assumption is free trade policy. Free trade, as I already explained in the previous lecture, no tariff barriers. Followed, there is smooth movement of the commodities. That is the meaning of free trade policy. Now, sixth assumption is absence of transport cost. Olin and Hexture are assuming that the transport cost must not be there in calculating the cost of production of a commodity. Last assumption, that is seventh assumption, constant returns to scale in the production of both the commodities. We already studied constant returns to increasing returns to scale, constant returns to scale and diminishing returns to scale in FY BCom. Got the point? Now, these are the 7 assumptions of which theory? Modern theory of international trade, which is given by Hexture and Olin. Now, this Hexture and Olin theory depends upon two main concepts, that is factor intensity and factor abundance. That is factor intensity and factor abundance. Abundance means availability, or we can say supply, okay, of a factor. Okay. Now, these are the two important concepts of HO theory. HO theory means Hexture-Olin theory. Now, the first one is factor intensity. Now, we are going to study what is factor intensity. It means out of two countries, two factors and two commodities model, the capital rich country, we can say example USA, will produce more quantity of capital intensive commodity, and the labor rich country, we can give the example of India, will produce which type of commodity? More quantity of labor intensive commodity. Why? Because in India the population is more. So India will be using the labor intensive commodity, or the India will be using labor intensive methods to produce the labor intensive commodity. And after this production, USA export capital intensive commodity and India will export labor intensive commodity. Next one, the diagram. of factor intensity. In this diagram, y-axis, it is there labor. L is there. L means labor. There are two factors, labor and capital. K is capital. In the above diagram, there are two nations, nation 1 and nation 2. Okay. Nation 1, we can say India. It is labor intensive. And nation 2, USA, is capital intensive. In nation 1, in order to produce, nation 1 is what? Labor intensive. In order to produce 1 unit of commodity X, 1 unit of capital is required and 4 units of labor are required. Got the point? And in order to produce 1 unit of commodity Y, 2 units of capital are required and 2 units of labor are required. In the case of nation 2, that is USA, it is capital intensive, and in order to produce 1 unit of commodity X, 2 units of labor, 2 units of capital and 2 units of labor are required. And in order to produce 1 unit of commodity Y, 4 units of capital and 2 units of labor are using. Which country? The country 2 or nation 2. So we can say that nation 2 is capital intensive because they are using more and more capital. This 4 is greater than, 4 is more. Correct? No? This y-axis, it lies above. And 2, that is OX, on the OX axis it is 2, it is less. And y-axis, that's the 4 units. And here nation 1 is labor intensive because they are using more and more units of labor, that is 4. And 4 is greater than 2. 2 is here, or is measuring on y-axis, that is capital. And 4 is measuring on x-axis, that is labor. So we can say that, but we can say the nation 1, that is labor intensive, and they use labor intensive methods and produce more labor intensive commodity. And nation 2, they are capital intensive because capital is more in that country. So they produce more capital intensive commodity. So this is the explanation of factor intensity. Now the second point I will give you in the next lecture. Thank you, students.